On January the 7th, 1968, the bodies of 3 people were found slumped in a station wagon in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston. All 3 bodies were African American, and all 3 had been shot in the head. The triple homicide puzzled detectives for years, until the greatly feared Boston hitman Johnny the Executioner Martorano took a plea deal in 1999 and became a cooperating witness for the government. So, why did Johnny Martorano, Whitey Bulger's favourite hitman, carry out the triple murder in Roxbury 1968? On the 6th of January 1968, Winter Hill gang member Stevie Flemmi phoned his friend and fellow gangster Johnny Martorano and told him that he had been assaulted and beaten at Basin Street, a jazz club in the South End. Basin Street was a location that people knew as Martorano's regular hangout. Flemmi would tell Martorano, "Motherfucker held me from behind, Johnny. Give me a beating. Sapped on the head. Johnny, your place." The man who Stevie Flemmi says was responsible for the beating was Herbert "Smitty" Smith, although some reports state his name was Hubert. Smitty Smith worked at Basin Street. Basin Street was a club owned by Rocco LaMattina, a gangster connected with the Patriarca Crime Family. Martorano tracked down Smitty to Basin Street and asked him about the beating of Flemmi. As the book Hitman by Howie Carr states, "I said to him, I heard Stevie was in here last night and he got a beating. And he says, yeah. I says, what happened? And he says, Stevie was way out of line. That's all he said. Way out of line, I says to him. This is a friend of mine, Stevie. He comes down here and you give him a beating? Martorano wasn't satisfied with Smitty's responses, which would have drastic consequences for the 47-year-old Herbert "Smitty" Smith. He kept giving me all the wrong answers, Johnny Martorano said. He didn't give me any respect. All he had to do was say, I didn't know he was your friend. I'm sorry. That's all he needed to say. It would have been a whole different ballgame. Martorano consulted with his friend and fellow gangster, Steve the Greek Bruchers, who was also in the club. The decision was made that Smith had to be killed for the beating delivered to Stevie Flemmi. Johnny Martorano then spoke again with Smitty and asked him if he'd like to go to an after-hours card game. Smith agreed and said he would meet him later on Normandy Street. And so, on the 7th of January, at just after 3 a.m. on a snowy night, Herbert Smith sits waiting in his car, a Mercury, on Normandy Street. Johnny Martorano is dropped off by Steve the Greek and makes his way through the snow towards Smith's vehicle. As Martorano approached, he saw that there were 3 people in the car. However, this didn't deter Martorano. It just meant that he would have to work faster. The book Hitman states, he had his hand on the gun as he got into the car. The first one he shot was Smith in the driver's seat. The other 2 Johnny could barely see because he'd been practically blinded by the flash of the first shot. He later told cops all of the shooting had taken no more than 3 seconds. The Mercury was full of smoke from the gunshots. There was no sound in the car, no moans. They were all dead. Johnny reached into the front seat, turned off the ignition, grabbed the keys, but left the headlights on. Then he got out of the car and started walking slowly down Normandy Street. The police were left scratching their heads as to why the triple homicide had taken place, as reported in one newspaper the following day. The trio, all Negroes, were found slumped in a station wagon parked at an angle to the street at 5:50 a.m. by Sergeant Michael Donnelly of Division 9. Each had been shot several times in the head, apparently with a handgun. Lieutenant James MacDonald of the Homicide Division said police were baffled as to the reason for this vicious murder. Police officials, however, said they did not think it was connected with the recent wave of gangland killings. Police were puzzled by the relaxed attitudes in which the bodies were found in the blood-splattered car, and theorised that the killer was well known to the victims and was either in the car himself or waiting at the curb. The bodies were quickly identified at the Southern Mortuary. Herbert Smitty Smith, 47, had been found shot in the head while sat in the driver's seat. In the passenger seat was a 19-year-old girl by the name of Elizabeth Frances Dixon, her head resting on Smith's right knee. Allegedly, she had started seeing Smith only a few weeks prior to her murder. Even more tragically, in the back seat was 17-year-old Douglas Barrett. It has never been established as to why he was in the car. All three had gunshot wounds to the head. When Johnny Martorano started cooperating with the government over 3 decades after this triple murder, he was quizzed as to why he also shot the teenagers, which included a girl. The testimony went as follows. Lawyer: when you met Smith and killed him, you got into a car with him, is that right? Martorano: yes, I did. Lawyer: there were 2 teenagers with him, isn't that right? Martorano: when I met him in Roxbury, there was 3 people in the car, and I took it to be 3 guys. It was the middle of a snowstorm at 2 in the morning. Lawyer: how far away were you from Mr. Smith when you shot him? Martorano: a foot. Lawyer: and people in the car were right next to him, isn't that right? Martorano: was the middle of winter. They were dressed in winter clothes, and I just got in the car and started shooting. He was supposed to be alone. I saw 3. What I took, what I believed, was 3 men, and I said to myself, I better shoot fast because they may have the same thing on their mind for me as I have for them. Lawyer: and you didn't look to see if the people... Martorano: I just shot 3 times. After the first flash, it was just shadows. Lawyer: it's not your testimony that if you saw it was a woman, you would have stopped, is it? Martorano: if I knew it was a woman, I wouldn't have done it. But I couldn't stop and leave people behind. Lawyer: because is it your testimony that you don't kill women? Martorano: positively not. So, why exactly was Stephen Flemmi beaten up? The event that led to the horrendous triple homicide. An FBI file would later state, informant stated that recently Stevie Flemmi had been beaten up over $300. Flemmi had tried to collect and met some fast talk. Flemmi later went back to a bar where he was beaten up by a Negro bartender. Informant stated that Stevie Flemmi was in pretty bad shape, however, stated that he would take care of the matter himself. Johnny Martorano would later find out the true story. Stephen Flemmi had loaned the son of Rocco Lamattina money and had gone down to Rocco's club, Basin Street, to collect what he was owed. Flemmi then starts making a scene. Martorano would recall, what I find out later is Stevie's been shylocking to Rocco's son. Now, Rocco is a loan shark himself. Stevie shouldn't be doing this. And now, he's down in Rocco's own place, which is what Basin Street was at that point, looking for Rocco's kid, over $300. I didn't know this, but it was actually Stevie who was out of line, not Smith. Smith was a big guy, so he grabbed Stevie's arms while Rocco and Cincotti worked him over. And of course, Stevie is humiliated, but he can't do nothing about the 2 mafia guys, so he blames it all on the black guy. That's when he calls me. In 1999, Johnny Martorano accepted a plea deal to become a cooperating witness. He admitted to personally carrying out 20 murders, and as a result, served just 12 years in prison. I hope you found that interesting. Till the next time.